The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey everyone, welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here to discuss our July 2024 book club pick, The Sense of Wonder by Matthew Salesses, a contemporary novel following the rise of a Korean American basketball star and the stories of the people around him. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners over at patreon.com/booksandboba. So if you'd like to become a bigger part of our book club, head on over. Our supporters gain access to our members-only Discord server, as well as monthly bonus podcasts. So definitely appreciate everyone who supported us so far.
Yeah, I have to say that this is a very timely read because the Olympics is happening right now. So I forgot that basketball was like a Olympic sport.
Yeah, we're totally in a sports mood right now because of the Olympics. And I'm sure we'll be talking more about that in this month's Boba Chats that's coming out in about a week or two. But yeah, I think you're right. It's kind of like the perfect time to read this book, especially when there's been a lot of really great Asian American sports stories happening in the Olympics. So yeah, definitely invoking the same feelings that this book explores. So as always, in our book club discussions, we will be discussing the book in its entirety. So this is your advanced spoiler warning. If you haven't finished the book yet and care about that, hit pause on the podcast, go finish the book, and then come back and listen to our thoughts. But I will say, if you haven't finished the book yet or think about reading the book, the story is all about context. So maybe if you're unfamiliar with the Asian American perspective, this conversation might actually help you better understand the themes of the book going in. So, however you like to read, you do you. But let's get started with our discussion. Rira, can you start us off, as always, with the book jacket description?
Yeah, sure. Before I do, I just want to give out some content warnings. There is mention of racial slurs, and also there's a character with cancer, and parental deaths are mentioned. So if any of those topics are sensitive to you, just proceed with caution. An Asian American basketball star walks into a gym. No one recognizes him, but everyone stares anyway. It is the start of a joke, but what is the punchline? When Won Lee, the first Asian American in the NBA, stuns the world in a 7-game winning streak, the global media audience dubs it The Wonder, much to Won's chagrin. Meanwhile, Won struggles to get attention from his coach, his peers, his fans, and most importantly, his hero, Powerball, who also happens to be Won's teammate and the captain. Covering it all is a sports writer, Robert Sung, who writes about Won's stardom while grappling with his own missed hoops opportunities, as well as his place as an Asian American in media. And to witness it all is Carrie Kang, a big studio producer who juggles a newfound relationship with Won while attempting to bring K-drama to an industry not known to embrace anything new or different. The Sense of Wonder follows Won and Carrie as they chronicle the human and professional tensions exacerbated by injustices and fight to be seen and heard on some of the world's largest stages.
Yeah, I was really surprised by this book. I went in knowing that it was about sports, about basketball, based on the Linsanity phenomenon of 2012. But I did not expect to get Matthew Salesses' take on the Asian American experience. This is a person who has definitely been in the spaces that we've been in and has experienced the trials and tribulations of being Asian Americans in the early aughts, right? What did you think about the general vibe of the book?
Yeah, like I was a little bit hesitant about getting into this book because I've mentioned in previous episodes I'm not like a big basketball fan, and the jargon can just kind of go over my head. But I had to keep reminding myself, I'm like, you watch sports animes. Like there's a lot of stuff in those animes that just kind of go over your head. It's fine. You're going to enjoy it if you just don't focus on the jargon too much. And I did. I think Matthew did a really good job making you feel the tensions of the game. I thought it was interesting how he wove in Carrie's storyline and also this fictional K-drama plot, like because the book is split into different parts, right? So that was really surprising to me, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Definitely got some war flashbacks of of covering Asian American entertainment and news, and the rep sweats were really real back then, you guys.
Yeah, there's one specific scene in, I think it was like within the first 5 chapters. I think it's the chapter that he first meets Carrie at like the premiere of an Asian American film that everyone agrees was terrible, but nobody could say that it was bad. And that was like the Asian American entertainment experience back in like early 2010s. Like it was just a lot of films that we were just happy it got made, but we were all like I've been to a ton of those premieres where it's like nobody liked the film, but nobody could say that they didn't like the film.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been to a lot of Asian American film festivals, and there's always going to be some films that are going to play into the cliches of the Asian immigrant experience, usually going into like generation 1.5 or second generation of my parents don't understand me, culture clashes between 2 generations, and just a lot of angst. And it's like, okay, well, like those stories have been kind of overdone. And by the time we hit like Crazy Rich Asians, it was like we were ready to move on to like happier representation where it's like, okay, we can be scumbags on screen. We can be other things other than the geek or the sidekick.
I mean, my thing wasn't even that. Like there are ways to do intergenerational trauma storylines well, and certain films did do it well, like Saving Face, right? That was a good example of it. But
that was back in like 2008, right? 2007.
Yeah, and even like The Wedding Banquet, Ang Lee's film. I watched that recently, like the original Ang Lee version, and like that film did that storyline so well that it made me retroactively mad at all the other Asian American films that I've watched that like fumbled the ball, right? And I mean, there's something to be said about filmmakers having the opportunity or the chances to make bad films and learn from them. And, you know, that's something that the Asian American community didn't really have. Like all of the films that we made just felt like, you know, do or die situations, not unlike the, you know, what happened during the Linsanity phenomenon, right? But I think for me, the thing that I got the most annoyed of was that, you know, in the early 2000s, like there was a certain type of Asian American film. Everyone was trying to make like their Asian American family comedy. And the jokes were always at the expense of the parents, the elders. It was always like pointing out like, hey, look how weird our parents are. Look how weird our traditions are. And I feel like that's something that our Asian American filmmakers have gotten better at in recent years, which is like showcasing the uniqueness of our cultures, but not at the expense of them, right? Not making our parents the joke.
Yeah, and Carrie does mention this later on in the book, how if she continued just making Asian American films, she would just be pigeonholed in that. And I know that is a fear that a lot of Asian American filmmakers and producers have. And yeah, that feeling of this movie was not very good, or this TV show was not very good, but it's a miracle to get funding from a studio, from like a white studio, because there's a lot of Asian films and like indie projects out there, but they're, you know, crowdfunded, they're indie made, you know? So like when a big studio like ABC decides to make a series like Fresh Off the Boat, and what was the sitcom that
Dr. Ken.
Yeah, I remember when I had to cover Dr. Ken, and I did not like that show at all. I can say it now because it's been a number of years, but Yeah, that feeling of like everybody is so happy that this got made and everyone is afraid to criticize it because it means that the entertainment industry is going to be like, okay, well, if their own community, if their own people don't like this, then why should we spend more money on it?
Yeah, it's like the All-American Girl thing, right? Like Jeff Yang famously wrote a negative review about it, and
I know Jeff still has war flashbacks on that.
And, whether or not it directly led to the cancellation of Margaret Cho's, groundbreaking television series, it's something that looms over the community like forever. Like no one wants to be that person, right? No one wants to be responsible for that. So that's why, we were all walking on eggshells and why 2018 was such a breakthrough moment. But I'm curious, Rira, about your thoughts on the main character. Like the main character at the center of this basketball phenomenon was a Korean American, right? Because the phenomenon is based on Linsanity, which was the run of games that Jeremy Lin came off the bench while Carmelo Anthony was injured for the Knicks in 2012 and just went on a tear. And it was a few months that was like a singular moment for the Asian American community. And so I thought it was really funny that in Matthew's version, it kind of reads like an AU fanfic of Linsanity, right? Like, what if Jeremy Lin was a Korean American instead of a Taiwanese American? And I feel like it kind of works better for the story, right? Because maybe this is just me stereotyping, but it feels like the kinds of drama that like a Korean American brings is way more spicier than like, say, a Taiwanese American.
I'm not so sure about that because I've seen some really dramatic Taiwanese Chinese people out there and throw them into sports and,
yeah, but I guess
sports is already dramatic as hell. So
yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is there is a slight difference in like the generational trauma that a Taiwanese American and a Korean American might experience. And, there is a wide spectrum depending on how our families came to the country and what the circumstances were. But in terms of like the generational trauma, I feel like Korean Americans, Korean diaspora, the wounds are a little bit more fresh. A lot of Taiwanese Americans were about 2 generations removed from like that war trauma, whereas the Korean diaspora is like at most 1 generation removed, right?
I mean, it's not 1 generation anymore.
Well, yeah.
But, I see what you mean. Yeah, with like Jeremy Lin, I feel like the Korean American community like just adopted him as like our own because it was just this moment of like, wow, like we're seeing someone who looks like us be in the NBA and like scoring and like making those like wins happen. So I feel like it was like a collective Asian American experience. Linsanity was. So it wasn't that much of a stretch for me to read Won as a Korean American character. Like what's funny is that like Won Lee is my cousin's name. So like every time I listened to this book on audiobook, so I was just like, oh my God, like it would like take me out of it sometimes because there's like the pun with wonder and just like they make it very clear that, they're capitalizing on his like name and how like punny it can be. So I was like rolling my eyes a little bit at those parts. But one thing I found really interesting was how Juan and Robert, they're both Asian Americans who occupy different spaces, but they have like the same basketball trajectory. They both were like really good on court. They both played with Powerball. So they have like their lives are kind of parallel, but Juan comes from an enclave. So I'm guessing, was it like in Queens? Was it Flushing?
LA,
I don't remember. LA K-Town?
Yeah. His
like
family
not New York
moved
K-Town.
to Fullerton from LA K-Town.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So he's from Fullerton, LA K-Town. That's very different from New York K-Town, Flushing K-Town, because I don't know, like East Coast Asians and West Coast Asians, I feel like they have different struggles when it comes to navigating their Asian Americanness.
Yeah.
We mentioned it in previous episodes because like Marvin grew up in the 626 area and you never really had that challenge of like, oh, am I Asian enough because you're surrounded by Asians.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely something that I personally experienced too that I can relate to is the fact that like I didn't feel like a minority until I moved outside of, you know, my bubble. And even in college, went to a college where 40% of the student population was Asian. So it wasn't until I moved to the East Coast in DC where I first felt like a minority. And like it literally took one day for someone to ask me where I was really from. And I was like, wow, this actually happens to people. And it was kind of a novel experience. But, you know, going to grad school on the East Coast also exposed me to Asians who came from those places. Like I have a friend from Indiana who told me about how she would get embarrassed when her parents would bring out Asian snacks for her white friends, right? Like actively embarrassed, actively like shutting that down. And that was like foreign to me. And I thought that was really interesting that you have both of these guys, Robert and Juan, who are, you know, hoop heads. They love basketball. They're very passionate, heated Korean men, right? But because of their upbringings, they have very different relationships with their sense of self and their sense of self when compared to others. In this case, with Powerball, right? And I thought it was really interesting because, you know, Robert Sung, he is a character that he is adopted. He has like a lot of hangups about that, right? And I think Matthew Salasis himself is adopted, right?
Yeah, that's true. He's an adoptee.
So I wonder how much of his own personal experience growing up adopted he put into Robert Sung and how much of his experience he put into Juan, right? But the fact that like Robert Sung was much more aware of the work that has to be put in to exist in these like, in this case, like white and black space, right? Like of basketball. Whereas because Juan grew up in a bubble, because Juan grew up in a place where he didn't have to be constantly second guessing, constantly worried about his identity, he comes in with kind of this more naive view where like, yeah, it is a meritocracy. If I just do well, I'll succeed, right? And I thought that was really interesting because I definitely do relate to that as well. Like the idea that like, you know, we grew up in, it's not just a bubble, but we grew up in like a, you know, a microclimate, a micro world where our identity didn't matter as much because our community was already diverse, right? You know, was it equal? Probably not. But in terms of like, I always felt like I had the same opportunities as all my other classmates. But, you know, when you move to a different microclimate, different community where those rules don't apply, it is hard to adjust your thinking, right? I think that's where a lot of the conflict comes in because Juan definitely feels like he just needs to put his head down and work and people will have to recognize him. And Juan's like, that's not how this shit works. You can't be the model minority. And I don't think Juan's trying to be the model minority. It's just he didn't grow up in a place where he had to worry about that.
I think it's interesting how both of them are kind of outsiders, but kind of face different struggles because Juan is an outsider on like in the court. He's constantly benched because his coach is just like, no, we're going to use Powerball. Like I don't need you on the court.
Well, his coach is also
and
like actively racist too, right? He doesn't.
And he's actively racist too. So he has to fucking deal with that. And with Robert, he has like, you know, like you said, all these hangups about like being Asian American when he grew up in like a white neighborhood. But like he also feels like an outsider to like the Asian American community. So like he kind of is more aware of the politics when it comes to occupying space in the sports world and also, you know, kind of not fitting in with the Asian American community. So I always thought that was like really interesting. And just like how his jealousy comes into play because it's just like, oh, I wanted to be the first Asian American, Korean American NBA player. And I don't know, there's just like this, it's a lie, but it's just like, oh, there can only be one, you know, why couldn't I be the one?
Yeah.
Again, pun. One.
And it's complicated that his playing career was ended with an injury that was caused by Powerball since they were high school classmates. And in his mind, he has internalized the narrative that it was on purpose and it was over a girl they both liked, which I thought it was funny. So the very last part of this book asks you to reread the book with like the frame of reference of the story being a K-drama, which I had already clocked halfway through the book, and I was like, this is a K-drama that we're reading. There's love triangles, there's a cancer storyline. Like, this is just like
there's a
K-drama.
childhood rivalry, and then you have like two characters who are like actively playing against each other when it comes to, because Robert, despite hating Powerball for kind of ruining his opportunity to play professionally, he's still like obsessed with him and writes about him. That's his beat, because that's the way he can stay in the game. And it's like, why do you do this to yourself, man?
This is a love story between Robert and Powerball.
It's an obsession story.
I mean, it was really funny to see. Like, I think Matthew did a really good job just showing that like the drama that comes in sports is just as juicy as your K-drama, because the personal stuff is obviously all made up. But the real drama between Wong and Powerball about these two conflicting styles, where like, you know, Wong's play style is very like, he's a point guard that moves the ball really well and makes the whole team better. Whereas Powerball is, his style is taking over the game and like being the one to win games for the whole team. And that clash is like, it's a pretty common conflict in like sports anime and sports dramas, right? But it's also the real life conflict between Jeremy Lin and Carmelo Anthony towards the end of Linsanity.
Yeah, since Won is the first Asian American / Korean American NBA player, when he got recruited or didn't get recruited, the answer that a lot of coaches gave was, oh, you have no frame of reference because he's the first one, right? So there's a layer of like, okay, like model minority, you have to show gratitude for like getting this opportunity, because like, how can an Asian person who comes from a race where there's short people, how can they play basketball professionally?
Yeah.
But at the same time, he has to like put his head down because of Powerball. So it's not just all model minority stuff. It's like, you're new and you don't want to step on anybody's toes. Yeah, it's not all model minority. There's drama everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book did a really good job of portraying also just how bullshit press conferences are. Like, everyone knows the real story behind it, but everyone has to say it's all about the team. I'm just doing my part. It kind of reminds me of like whenever there's like I don't know if this is probably the case in Korean media too, but like whenever like an idol or a pop star has to give like a press conference and all their answers are just the most basic, like non-offensive, obviously just things that the company wants them to say. Right?
Yeah, I think that's changed quite a bit, not just in like entertainment, but also in sports, because social media exists and individual players can express their discontent, but also like players have more agency these days. Like, they know what they're worth. I feel like coaches and people who buy teams, like, they don't have as much like control over their team. So, I mean, that's kind of what I've observed as like a casual viewer of sports. I'm not sure if that's actually true. And like, if the players are just like, fuck it, let's just say whatever we want, or like go against the grain. But that's kind of what I felt.
One of the things that we talked a lot about on Discord was the scene at the end of, I believe it was part 3, where after the All-Star game, and this is when, in the middle of all the drama between Sung, Powerball, Britt, and Ducky, right? Or just Britt, mainly. Britt, who is Powerball's current wife, who is cheating on him with Robert's, and who is the person that Robert had a crush on throughout high school and was like his best friend until she got with PB.
Also, Britt's a white woman, by the way. I thought that was very important because, it's like, oh, the white woman is like the ultimate prize of, making it for men of color. So
yeah,
just thought that I would throw that in there.
So at the end of part 3, Wong gets injured because PB, quote unquote, accidentally was in the wrong position and Sung like, was his ankle or his knee? He lands weird.
It was his knee. Yeah.
Did you think it was on purpose?
No, absolutely fucking not. I feel like it was a total accident. I feel like these things happen in sport, and like, who has the time to even like calculate a plot like that when you're on the court? And I thought it was just really obsessive of Robert to be like, oh, he did it on purpose. Like, he did it to me when I was in high school. He's doing it to you now because he's jealous of your success. There can only be one star on this team. And I'm like, what Kool-Aid have you been drinking? Like, you're so obsessed with Powerball, but Powerball is not thinking about you at all until he finds out that you're, getting his wife to have sex with you.
Here's the thing, because when that happened, it was after he found out that Robert was having sex with his wife. And so I kind of think even
he was just taking out his...
Yeah, even if it wasn't on purpose, I think it was like a heat in the moment thing. Like Powerball is someone who is characterized as like someone who probably has never been in a situation where he wasn't the best player on his team. Like, he's just been so good for so long. So he has like this sense of like everything is supposed to fall into place for him. And so like seeing his wife cheat on him with his supposed friend, he has kind of a breakdown, right? And much like Robert projects his own hoop dreams onto Juan, I feel like Powerball also projects some of his insecurities onto him as well. Like, both Robert and Powerball are using Juan as a proxy for their like internal fight. And, I feel like Powerball definitely was taking out his frustration on Juan, right? Like, in the All-Star games, he was freezing him out, like making like humiliating him, right?
But I highly doubt that he wanted to physically injure his teammate on purpose. So I feel like you're right. Like, it was like a heat of the moment thing where he probably wasn't as careful as he would have been if it was a different teammate. But yeah, I don't think it was.
And regardless, he was definitely letting his personal life affect his play, which is something that Juan would never do. Like, he's very good at like focusing on like playing, even though like he's dealing with all this bullshit about being Asian American in the league.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, it's racist of Powerball to be like, oh yeah, so I'm gonna take this out on my Asian teammate who has absolutely nothing to do with my family affairs. And also, it was just kind of like, well, he's friends with Robert, right? And it's like, no, they're not friends at all. You're just assuming that because they're both Asian.
Yeah.
And they talk to each other because of their jobs.
And like Robert also, like, these two guys definitely made their personal problems everyone's problem, right? Juan, poor Juan, just wants to play basketball in the league, and he can't be allowed to because these two guys are just messy as hell and making their messiness his problem.
Yeah, and also just like the ultimate betrayal of Robert writing that article, being like, "Oh, the wonder, the 7-game winning streak has ended." And it was just like a one-time thing. The article had like the headline, "Oh, the Great Wall Falls." And I remember that was like an actual headline for Linsanity at one point. And
no, it was Chink in the Armor. That was the...
Oh, Chink in the Armor. Headline. Yeah, that was the headline. That's worse. But yeah, and he says, "Oh, not my headline. That was like my editor." And I'm just like, dude, you still wrote the fucking article. You still wrote, like, you still roasted Juan. Like, I don't think, like, you have zero solidarity. And like, it was really hurtful for Juan to find out that way. It was like through text message.
Yeah, definitely. I think, not to skip ahead, but...
He's a race traitor.
I mean, Robert Sung definitely has hung out on Asian Reddit. Like, that man has definitely posted about white man, Asian female posts in the past, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We haven't talked about the other. So there's 3 point of view characters. It's Juan, it's Sung, and it's Carrie. And Carrie's story is, tangentially linked to the basketball drama because she becomes Juan's girlfriend. But she's dealing with her own issues of being Asian American in a white world with the added dimension of misogyny from both America and Korea. What did you think about Carrie's storyline?
I wasn't a really big fan of the K-drama chapters in this book because, I don't know, it was just kind of like, it took me out of the story. I mean, which is what Matthew wanted because he decided to split the book into 3 parts. But I was like, oh, we went from Won's NBA struggles and all of a sudden we're in Korea now. So that was a little bit hard for me to get used to. And yeah, like with Carrie's struggles, I like could definitely relate to it a little bit more because I'm more knowledgeable in that field. And what's really interesting is that the Korean drama industry, most of the writers are women. I think like back in like 2018, they did a survey and it was like over 95% of drama writers are women. And most of the directors are men. However, that has changed. Like there's still more male directors than women directors, but Coffee Prince, Cheese in the Trap, Love Alarm, Crash Landing on You, Queen of Tears, which came out this past year, they're all directed by women. So there were just some parts where I was like, okay, I feel like Matthew has outdated information on the K-drama industry. He talks about like how dramas are filmed live pretty much. Like they don't film everything after the script is finalized. They kind of write as they go along. And a lot of productions don't do that anymore simply because it's kind of expanded from the 3 main broadcasting stations. So there's KBS, NBC, SBS.
Well, they're producing for streaming
Those 3,
now, right? That has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah, that has a lot to do with it too. But it's like you also have cable channels like GTBC, TVN, and those cable companies, I think they're the ones who pioneered okay, let's write an entire series and then film it. They kind of followed the American model. And it made shooting a lot easier. And this is not an easy industry. They are filming for like 20 hours straight and give you like a 3-hour, 4-hour reprieve so that they can kind of go through that loophole of you can't have your staff work for 24 hours. You have to give them like a minimum number of hours when they're not working, and they kind of maximize that as much as possible because it's Korea and we are very all about efficiency and all about working as much as possible. So it was an environment that I was like really familiar with. So there were like little things here and there where I'm like, it's a little outdated. They don't do that anymore. I mean, there's streaming, so the politics are a little bit different now, especially when like Korean dramas are kind of like the hot thing that they're collecting.
I mean, but this story also took place in 2012, right? So it would kind of make sense that things are a little outdated, right?
Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, because this book definitely takes place in the pre-2018 world, a pre-Crazy Rich Asians world. I enjoyed Carrie's section. Like, I think fundamentally, this book is about the Asian American experience and not primarily about basketball. Like basketball is a frame of reference, which is a term that Matthew uses a lot in this book. But this is a book about how Asian Americans is not a monolith. Everyone has different experiences. Everyone has different, like depending on where you grew up, how you grew up, your fundamental sense of self, sense of identity, sense of your place in the world is different. And it's all about how you grow and how you approach that, right? Like, you know, Juan and Carrie have a little more healthy relationship with that, right? Like they're able to change their frame of reference and adjust to what being happy, being fulfilled, being successful as Asians can be. Whereas Sung he's stuck in this frame of reference where he's constantly chasing acceptance, right? Whether that's through covering basketball or pursuing this woman that he has somehow internalized as like the end goal of his like self-validation. And that pursuit ends up like ruining his career, ruining his life, right?
Yeah. I mean, Robert Sung has a victim mentality and he needs to freaking get over it. I mean, like it happened in high school, man. You're like, how old now? But this is a tangent. So I remember when I was like 18, I was like right before I went to college for like longtime listeners will know that I went to NYU for screenwriting. So this was right before I was going to go to college. And my grandmother, she was friends with someone whose daughter was working as a PD for NBC. She produced a lot of variety shows. So this wasn't like K-drama, but she was one of the very few PDs who had her own shows. So we got in contact and she kind of gave me a tour of the studio, and I got to kind of see like how the shows were put together. And I got to meet like a room full of writers who happened to be all women. And like there was a moment when my grandmother had like stepped away and it was just the PD and me. And she told me, "Hey, don't come here to work." And I was like, "Excuse me? I mean, you spent the last like 45 minutes showing me the studio and how things work. And, you know, there's all these women who are working in the studio." And she's like, "Don't come here to work because they will overwork you. They will grind you to the ground. You look like a girl who has, you know, spirit and ambition. And I don't want to see that die." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But, you know, like I was just like really baffled by what she said. And it kind of stayed with me as I like went through college and graduated and like worked in entertainment. Because like another thing that she said to me was, "You will have better opportunities. It will be easier for you if you stay in Hollywood." And that is not the case. like I guess in their minds it's like, okay, well, you're American, so you'll have a better opportunity in the American industry. And it's like, well, the American industry is also racist. So there is that ceiling there. But like to her, it was just like she didn't quite understand the diaspora struggle. And this kind of shows up in Carrie's relationship with the staff. Like Carrie is pretty much their boss. She is the executive producer of this fortune teller drama that she is producing. And it's weird for the crew because they're like, we're not used to seeing a Korean woman take charge of a project like this. And at the same time, she's like working in American work ethic. She's like not staying with them for like 20 hours. She like comes and goes whenever she pleases. And also like the hierarchy, the power balance is like completely different. Also like because she's American, she has privilege when it comes to dealing with the sexism in the industry. Like she can confidently say, "Fuck off. Don't come on to the women writers and women crew members," to like this one dude who like had a reputation to do with that. And I'm like, oh, but like the Korean PDs and the Korean writers can't say that because that will risk their reputation and job. But you're allowed to say that because you're American and you're more outspoken. Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting trait.
And like, let's fire this one actor who's having like these sexual abuse allegations, right?
Yeah, like when that popped up, I was like, oh, Burning Sun and all of the scandals that have come up recently. It's very interesting that this book takes place around like 2012 because a lot of things changed post 2016. Because 2016 is when there was like this very prolific murder of a woman in Gangnam. She was like gruesomely murdered at a subway station. And this kind of started the Me Too movement. And a lot of people in power who kind of had their scandals swept underneath the rug, you know, people are digging them up. And a lot of them were people in power in the entertainment industry. So it reminded me a lot of that. And I was like, yeah, like that's kind of in the future, but it's happening now in 2012 in this book. So that was also interesting.
Yeah. I mean, Carrie's struggle is like she gets from all sides, right? From Korea, from America. Like in her production company, when she was making this very popular fortune teller drama, her boss, I forgot what they called him, but he was like the tool, was like just constantly minimizing her Asian work, right? And I thought it was a good move to like juxtapose her struggles with Wan's and with Sung's, because her struggles are against male toxicity, whereas Wong and Sung's struggles are male toxicity, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was like I remember one of our book club members in our Discord said it kind of seemed very bro-y in like the basketball chapters, and I'm like, yeah, there were some things that, like when they go to 노래방 and there's like that very awkward sex scene, I was like, this is so gross. Only like toxic men would fucking do this. And yeah, it's like very stereotypical of like all-stars basketball players, or really any all-stars like athlete. They kind of have that stereotype of being a little bit skeezy with women because they're rich, because they have power. So
what are your thoughts on, would you have watched this fortune teller drama?
I don't really watch Korean dramas, unfortunately. Yeah, like I tend to watch more Korean movies simply because the acting in K-dramas, they're a little bit over the top for me. And, they're like a lot of them, even though they're not all melodramas, they do have like an element of melodrama where you're like, I cannot believe this is happening. Too many things are happening. This person has cancer. This person can see ghosts. This person has amnesia. There's like betrayals. But I'm like really glad that K-dramas have kind of expanded their genre outside of romantic comedies, which have kind of dominated in like the 2010s. Now we have shows like The Glory and Kingdom, which is, thrillers, zombies. And you also have stories about older women and divorcees. So it's definitely evolved. But I haven't been a very big K-drama person. Would I watch this? This is more of a supernatural
Yeah, I
K-drama.
guess, would you rather watch Carrie's fortune teller drama or the basketball one? Because I know you do like the sports anime.
I would definitely watch her basketball drama because they have like that enemies to lovers tension, that I really love. It's like, oh, this reporter ruined this athlete's career and they somehow get together, but like she does something to betray him, but he still loves her and she runs away. And I'm like, oh my God, the drama. And in a way, it feels grounded because I'm like, oh yeah, these are like human emotions that are real, and I can see what would lead the character to make those decisions. Whereas with like a supernatural K-drama, I feel like I would have to suspend my disbelief a lot more.
I did love the melodrama of the fictional basketball player leaving his cushy Korean basketball league to play the NBA for the chance to make the All-Star team, for the chance to like do motion capture for the company that she now works for. I
was just like, there has to be another way. Why is this the only way? And also like the storyline of like, oh, he made a bet and that money was supposed to go to his niece's
who's in the coma,
surgery.
right?
Yeah, and I was like, ugh. But it's a K-drama, so you just kind of have to expect that trope, which is why like I clocked it in when Carrie's sister ended up having cancer, and I was like, oh, this is a K-drama. Like they're just living a K-drama.
I mean, it's smart on Matthew's part to just, say like, hey, the world of sports, this sports drama is just as messy as your favorite K-drama. I thought that was a cool point to make. I also really like that, Carrie goes back to Korea to film like a special bonus episode telling the aftermath of the fortune teller drama. And it all takes place in the subway. I got a kick out of that.
Yeah. I feel like the endings were what cinched the book for me. If it didn't have like those epilogues for each of the characters and have them be like super K-drama tropey, I would have been like, what was the point of reading Carrie's chapters? But I feel like with those endings, I'm like, okay, I kind of see what Matthew is trying to do here.
He did do Ducky dirty, though. Like, she didn't deserve that.
Yeah, fucking dying on, like, a bicycle handle, and I'm like, oh God, why? Like,
but it's very K-drama.
like Robert doesn't deserve to be happy with his white girlfriend / wife.
I mean, I don't think he is, because they never specifically say
ambiguous.
that they're still
We don't
together,
know.
right? Just that she finds new life as like playing moms in Hollywood.
And also, like, Carrie's sister miraculously recovering from cancer, which is also a K-drama trope.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember like what else. Like,
yeah, I mean, I did like that. Much like Jeremy Lin's story, Wong finally, at the end, Wong decides just to fuck off. Like, forget all this drama. I'm going to go to a place where they actually want me and go to play basketball in Korea. And just that added note that like both their parents couldn't understand why they would go back to Korea, because that's also a very Asian American, Asian diaspora experience, which is like, you know, the home country isn't the same country that you left. Like, there's actually probably opportunity there now that weren't there back when we immigrated.
yeah. And also there's, you know, Carrie's mom is a Korean adoptee, and, you know, her mom like was like, well, I didn't get to have like a Korean sense of like identity, so I want my daughter to like be able to speak Korean and be able to navigate the space. So yeah, I approve of her eventually like moving to Korea and living the life that she was kind of, you know, robbed
The
of.
fact that Carrie, as like a third generation or like 2.5 generation Korean American, spoke better Korean than Won, who is like a child of immigrants. I thought that was a good touch, because it's true.
It is true. It actually like really depends on your relationship with your parents, in my opinion. If you guys are close, then you seem to retain the language better. Or if you have like that motivation of like, I'm going to learn a second language and I'm going to actually work at it, like, obviously you're going to speak it better than someone who's a child of immigrants and is like, I don't want to talk to my parents. So you kind of like forget your mother tongue. So yeah, interesting dynamic.
Yeah. I think definitely, you know, what the book ends up for me is just a really good exploration of the dynamics of being Asian American, Asian diaspora in America. And, you know, it was interesting to see how many things are different. Like, the environment is different now, right? Like, post Crazy Rich Asians, Asian representation has taken on kind of new meaning, new life. Whether or not that's fizzling out, that's yet to be seen. But the challenges are still there, right? Like, we haven't had another Asian star in basketball since Jeremy Lin. We haven't, like, and the next one that comes out will probably face the same issues that he did, right? Like, society has not really improved that much. In some cases, it might have even regressed since, you know, 2012, 2016. So it's pretty cool to see how, you know, even though a lot of things are a little outdated because of, you know, it's been a decade since Linsanity, more than a decade, how many things are still very much the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Also with, you know, Korean culture becoming quote unquote cool in America, in the Western world. Like, I'm not just talking about like K-pop and K-dramas, but we're seeing, you know, people who are going to Korea for job opportunities, like normal corporate people. And, you know, that wasn't the case a couple years ago. And also, like, you know, this is before Parasite and before the Squid Games and before Netflix started to acquire and also fund K-dramas. So Carrie's struggle with getting her projects off the ground, I feel like if she tried to make them now, it would be a totally different story. But I just had to laugh when she pitched her basketball story, and they were like, "What if we made the characters white?" And I was just like, or was it the fortune teller drama? I don't remember, but like the Hollywood exec was like, "What if we made them white?" And she's like, "It doesn't work because the characters' Asianness and their culture, it like frames them. So if you take that frame away, then it's not the same story."
I think the point that Matthew was trying to make there was that the characters being Korean was super important to Carrie. Like, it was so important for her that the characters were Korean. But to the Korean members of her staff, they were like, whatever about it. They're like, what's wrong
Yeah,
with
because
white?
they're just like, what? Like, I mean, it's just like, we have Korean representation here in Korea. Like,
Yeah.
why do you care so much about, like Hollywood making room for Korean actors? Like, they can just come here, and it's like, it's not that easy. It's not.
Yeah.
But she recognizes that it's not their fight. She's like, this is our fight as diaspora creators. And it's like, yeah, it's true. Also, it is very frustrating though when you have to fight against like the motherland critiques. like what is it? We'll criticize like the live action adaptation of like an anime, and we'll be like, this was objectively not good. this was not a good show, and it was badly made. Why did they cast white people? It doesn't make sense. And then you have like Japan being like, it was good. Like, why would you complain that there aren't like Asian characters on this adaptation? You guys already have Asian actors in our adaptation of it. It's like, but it's not the same. Fighting that battle, having that fight every so often, it's really annoying and draining.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing where it's just the Asian American experience it's defined by our relationship with power, our relationship with whiteness, right? And that stuff is always, it's gonna affect the way that we see things. And that's the price of growing up as like a minority, right? As marginalized, as like, a group of people who have been stereotyped. So yeah, it's interesting. It's always interesting when you put, when you change again your frame of reference, that like the things that we really care about are things that only really matter to us. But I don't think that minimizes how important that is, right? Like, it's important for us to worry about this stuff, to think about this stuff, because like you said, it's not easy to like just move to another country and like get a job there. Like, and even if you do, you're dealing with all sorts of other things, right? Like, Carrie's job isn't automatically easier when she goes to Korea to do her work. In fact, in some ways, it's even harder, right? Because she is constantly running into faux pas, constantly like, breaching etiquette.
It's very like very patriarchal, and also it's a very like Korean, very Asian sentiment of like, everybody kind of has like this predestination. Like, when you're born, you have like a destiny that's like at the end of the road. Whereas like, I feel like America has more of like that narrative of like, anyone can make it. That's less of a case in Korea.
Yeah, and I think that's why at the very core of this book, it is an Asian American story, because the characters, or at least the characters that we care about, Carrie and Won, they do make their own destiny, right? They find not what they're meant to do, but what they want to do. And maybe that's also what they were meant to do, right? Like, there is like this through line of like, what sets like a Korean drama and Korean romance aside from like an American romance is this idea of fate.
Yeah, because like in K-dramas, it's like you are guaranteed like a happy ending. Like, that the main couple is going to get together. That the main girl is not going to get together with the secondary lead, even though he is like perfect on paper. But you don't know how they're going to get together. You don't know if like one of them is going to suffer from amnesia. Like, that, they're happy, but after that happiness, there's going to be something that breaks them apart and really tests them. But despite how hard that test is, you already know that they're going to get together. So, yeah, that sense, that space between certainty and wonder and like phenomenon. Yeah, that is like a through line in K-dramas.
And I feel like, in a way, Won and Carrie get their happy ending because they embrace that wonder. Whereas Robert he's still stuck in his like American sense of, I need to make my destiny happen, and ends up like, I don't know. We don't know how he ends up, but it doesn't seem like it's his happy ending.
I mean, he's in Houston.
Yeah.
Covering whatever sports team his boss like tells him to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's not promoted. Like, he's still very much a beat reporter, same beat, just different location. It's like, oh, nothing has really changed about him, other than he got the girl of his dreams, but we don't even know if they're like happy together in a relationship.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, that'll do it for our discussion of The Sense of Wonder by Matthew Salasis. Again, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share about our discussion or about the book, please let us know either on Discord or on our Goodreads forums. It's always great to hear your feedback on our discussions. And yeah, before we go, it's time to announce our August 2024 book club pick, which is my turn to pick what we read for book club. And for this month, I've chosen Land of Milk and Honey by C.Pam Zhang. It is a story that takes place in a dystopic future where a burnt-out chef gets recruited to a decadent mountaintop colony by an enigmatic employer, where she reawakens to the pleasures of taste, touch, and her own body. So it sounds like a cool mix of sci-fi dystopia with rich people horror and food, which makes for a really cool combination I'm excited to get into.
Yeah, I was just looking up C.Pam Zhang's author bio because the name sounded so familiar, and she is the author of How Much of These Hills is Gold, which has been like shortlisted for a lot of awards, which, you know, is a very lush historical fiction novel. So yeah, like I am excited to dive into this book since I've heard great things about her previous book.
Yeah, so excited to read along with you all. If you are a Patreon supporter, don't forget to read along with us on Discord. I'll be creating the discussion channel and posting the reading schedule shortly, so be sure to check that out and join in the conversation. But with that, thank you so much for joining us for our discussion of The Sense of Wonder by Matthew Salasis, our July 2024 book club pick. And we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.